The White House is now signaling that Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine must go after that unprecedented showdown and humiliation for Ukraine at the White House on Friday. Ukraine faces an existential crisis as Washington considers cutting off military aid entirely. Can Europe's frantic diplomatic efforts salvage what's left of Ukraine's Western alliance? Our next story tells you more.
Today is Monday, but we are forced to talk about what happened last Friday.
$1 billion. We gave you military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people.
You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
The public meltdown sparked by the Ukrainian president's aggressive pursuit for security guarantees in an Oval Office meeting continues to dominate headlines, raising anxiety for Kyiv and Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is now expressing gratitude to the US and President Trump personally for military aid over the years. But Zelensky offers no apology, a sign of the difficult road ahead for him in Washington.
Regardless of what happened earlier, despite everything, we remain constructive. We thought that the mineral agreement would be signed. On our side, we are ready to sign. Honestly, I think the US will be ready as well. Probably some time is needed to analyze certain things. I just wanted Ukraine's position to be heard.
This deepening rift threatens not just Ukraine's relationship with the US, but also Western unity. Determined to prevent Ukraine's isolation, European leaders gathered in London, vowing to build a coalition of the willing to craft a diplomatic path forward, one that might convince Trump to stay engaged.
Rightly, the Americans are saying, hey, you guys are talking about how to maintain a ceasefire / a peace deal, but first we have to make sure that we get there. And they are right on that, but at the same time we have to do this in parallel to make sure that we stand ready.
The discussions we've had today, particularly the coalition of the willing, is on the basis that this is a plan that we will work with the US and that it will have US backing.
But as Europe rallies, US Republican leaders openly question whether peace with Russia is even possible while Zelensky remains in power. White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz slams Zelensky's conduct as incredibly disrespectful, while US House Speaker Mike Johnson suggests Zelensky may need to step down. On the other hand, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard warns that the meeting has triggered a huge rift in US-Ukraine relations. With the pushback from Trump allies, Zelensky says it won't be that easy to remove him. Zelensky claims the only way to stop him from leading Ukraine was to stop him from contesting elections. There could be more trouble for Zelensky. Now, according to reports, Trump is mulling the possible suspension or complete cancellation of military aid to Ukraine, including weapons pledged by the Biden administration. This decision could apply to billions of dollars worth of radars, vehicles, ammunition and missiles awaiting shipment to Ukraine. No US aid at this critical juncture of war will be disastrous for Kyiv. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, for more on this, we are now being joined by Mike Buckley, senior journalist and political commentator. He's joining us live on this broadcast from London. Thank you so much for joining us on WION. The question that many are asking is, what should we make of the Trump administration and officials like Mike Waltz saying that Zelensky must step aside at this point?
I don't think there's any chance of Zelensky stepping aside. He's made clear that he wants to stay, that the only thing that would make him stand down would be if NATO membership was offered to Ukraine. And sadly, there's nobody suggesting that at the moment. He has a democratic mandate. His constitution says that he cannot stand down or they cannot hold elections while they're in a state of war, and they will be in a state of war for some time to come. And indeed, his popularity since he was attacked by the Trump administration has gone up hugely in Ukraine. So if there was an election, he would win it and he would remain president. So I don't think there's any chance of that happening, however much the Trump administration or however much the Putin administration in Russia wants that to happen.
Yesterday, during one of the Sunday shows here in the United States, the UK ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson, suggested that Ukraine should indeed declare a ceasefire in the war with Russia and endorse President Trump's proposed mineral deal. Then we heard that government officials took a stance saying that his stance is not the policy of the governments. What do you make of all of this? Is the UK and all of UK on the same page in basically how to deal with Ukraine?
I think the UK is on the same page. I think the problem here is that Peter Mandelson is not a career diplomat. You know, he's been a career politician, or else he's been in the back room in the Labour Party, as he was in the 1990s, working to get Labour into power. He sits in the House of Lords. He was running a lobbying organisation until quite recently. So for him, the shift of role to becoming a diplomat will probably take a little bit of adjustment. And I think it was James Cleverly, who was a Conservative member of Parliament and was Foreign Secretary, I think, in the last Conservative government for a time. He made the point that Peter Mandelson's job now is to reflect government policy and not to give his own opinion. So I would imagine that there will be people in the British government now having that conversation with Peter Mandelson and just saying, look, you're in a different role now. It's not your role now to give your opinion or to give a personal opinion that you think might be favourable towards the Trump administration. You need to work with us and give the opinion that's been directed to you by the Prime Minister and others in Westminster in London.
Very interesting. And what is the mood in Europe at this point? Is there sort of this push to have Zelensky and President Trump meet again to sign this mineral deal? Does Europe, EU basically, mostly, do they think that they can perhaps support Ukraine without the backing of the US should that happen?
So, I mean, the first priority for European leaders, as I think the vast majority of them have made clear since Friday, is to rebuild relations between Ukraine and the US. So the first priority, the first choice of European leaders is to maintain the Western alliance, to keep the US involved in supporting Ukraine, both militarily, diplomatically, and then in any other way, financially, as well. Worst case scenario, and I think we're a long way from this happening, if it happens at all. But worst case scenario, were the US government under President Trump to pull support, so to stop supporting militarily or financially Ukraine, Europe would have to step up to the plate. That is entirely possible in the sense that Europe's economy is bigger than the US economy. We have more people in Europe than they do in the US. But the problem is we've relied for 70 or 80 years on the US for security. So the US military is much bigger collectively than the European military is. But Europe has more than enough wealth, more than enough people to step up to the plate and create its own security and defense architecture when it comes to traditional armaments, when it comes to nuclear armaments, when it comes to things like intelligence, which of course the UK and France are already very strong in. But it would be a huge adjustment for Europe to step up to that. So say 5 or 10 years from now, Europe will be able to survive on its own without any US help. That's much more difficult now because we've relied on US support and because, for example, our intelligence infrastructure is very reliant on continued engagement with the US. So things would be difficult. But there are ways around this. I mean, for example, I think it's 377, something like that, billion dollars of frozen Russian assets within Europe. So at the moment, what Europe's doing is taking the interest off those assets and using that to support Ukraine. But there's an argument to suggest that we just use all of that money to essentially fund Ukraine's war effort. If that were the case, I don't think anybody thinks that we wouldn't be able to buy Ukraine, wouldn't be able to buy arms from the US. So it may be that we just have to pay for arms from the US for Ukraine rather than get them given. If that happens, then the Ukraine can still support itself with, of course, added support from the UK, from France, and from, as Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, was calling it over the weekend, a coalition of the willing of member states of the EU and other European member states like the UK and Norway who want to step in and support Ukraine, because collectively we all see that supporting Ukraine's security is supporting our own security. I don't think anybody thinks that even if Putin took all of Ukraine, that he would stop there. He would carry on into Poland and into the Baltic states, and probably as far as the Warsaw Pact line that existed in the Cold War.
Thank you so much for all of that analysis, Mr. Mike Buckley. Please do come back on WION. Of course, we'll be following this story very closely.
Thank you.